Amazing. Over to you.
Excellent. Can you hear me, everyone? Yes? Well, thank you for staying so late. We are the last panel of today, Fintech Marketing Hub's summer reception. First of all, thank you, Fintech Marketing Hub, for having us today. It's a great pleasure to have such a great panel tonight, all experts in branding. The title is Brand Building Breakthroughs in Fintech, Lessons from Pleo, Thredd, and Plum. So we have Vanessa Kreimeia, Head of Partner Marketing and Brand at Thredd, a B2B fintech company. Then we have Jack Cully, Head of Brand and Product Marketing and Plum, B2C company. And then James Keating, CMO at Pleo, B2B company. Thank you very much for joining the panel today. My name is Roberto Napolitano. I'm the CMO at Innovate Finance, membership association that represent fintechs in the UK. So today we're going to talk about three main things about branding. So we're going to touch upon what it means to build a brand or maybe to rebrand in an organization. Then we're going to look at comparing fintech branding with bank or incumbents, branding. So what are the lessons learned there? Anything that we can discuss, and then finally, how do we measure success of a brand, which is always important. As marketeers, we've been asked all the time, how can we measure return on investment on branding? It's not an easy question to answer, but we'll try our best. So first of all, I'd like each of you to introduce yourself, give us a bit more information about what you do at the company, what is the company about, and then we can start with what it takes to build a brand. Vanessa, do you want to go?
Shall I go first? Can you hear me okay? Hi, I'm Vanessa Kreimeia. I'm Head of Brand and Partner Marketing at Thredd. Thredd was GPS, and that's exactly what I'll be talking to you about. But we are an issuer processor, changing the way that businesses and consumers pay for goods and services and move money worldwide. So we're B2B, but we're on the card issuing and payment processing side.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vanessa. Jack?
Hello everyone, I'm Jack. I'm Head of Brand and Product Marketing at Plum. Plum is a savings and investments app that automates your money and helps you kind of save your money for life. So super excited to be here.
Very, very important. And James?
Hi everyone, James Keating, so CMO at Pleo. Been at Pleo just around 2.5 years now. For those who don't know Pleo, it's a Danish fintech unicorn, essentially Europe's #1 spend management company. So we help CFOs manage business spend, and we help employees and people like us just have a joyful experience when we're doing our expenses. And it is very joyful.
Very joyful. Okay, great. Great to hear. Well, thank you very much, James. So let's start with our first topic, which is building a brand or rebranding. So the first question I have for you, Vanessa, is what does that process, look like? What kind of elements are you looking at when you're looking at, in your case, rebranding from GPS to Thredd? Any challenges that you can share with us, anything that you worked on for the rebranding would be very useful. And then at the end, we can have questions from you, so we can ask Vanessa and Jack and James all questions about branding. Vanessa.
Sure, well, just to put everybody in the picture, GPS, or Global Processing Services, rebranded to Thredd last year in 2023. And it was 15 years as GPS before that, so that's not an insignificant amount of legacy and time as we're by no means a new kid on the block. So that actually put quite an interesting challenge our way about how to maintain that brand integrity, but also evolve and make sure that we were able to be fresh and relevant after such an enormous amount of time had passed. And for those of you that don't know, I said that we're kind of a card issuing payments processor, but we actually, GPS helped launch some of the biggest neobanks and fintechs of our time. Brands like Revolut and Starling and Monzo all leveraged our card issuing and payments platform to launch and scale their brands. So that was a lot of brand equity that we had. We now work with brands like Treasel and Curve. And so, I suppose the challenge for us was how can we maintain that, but also move things forward. And as with any rebranding project, it's not a one-man solo process. We had a number of very diverse stakeholders varying in elements of power, varying in elements of knowledge about branding and about rebranding process, and also varying in terms of emotional attachment and opinions about how things should be. So the only way to actually rally everybody and literally herd the raccoons is with data. So we went through a very intense period of research. We did a discovery process that involved really getting under the nuts and bolts of what the old GPS brand stood for, warts and all. There was good, and then there was things that we needed to move on from or improve or move away from. So that whole process took months. It took sort of 12 to 9 months. Initially discovery, and then strategy. Then we went through a process of brand architecture, and from that hung the name, and then from the name came the creative, and then from the creative came all of the planning about how to transform an existing brand, because it's not just about a launch. We had, literally down to the letterhead in the Word document, or it involved literally every single department within the organisation. So that transformation planning was like a huge work stream in its own.
And the activation as well.
And
so
then the activation,
yeah,
exactly. So when we did the research, as I said, there was the good, the bad and the ugly. Two of the key things that we learned, which really gave us fuel in the fire to proceed with the rebrand, were number one, the name. So GPS, Global Processing Services, was such a mouthful to spit out at events, and such a confusing name. It's weirdly generic and also really hard to remember at the same time. I remember it was still GPS when I was joining, and I had to write it down on my hand so I could get Global Processing Services right, and I didn't muddle it up with Global Positioning Services. And we got that a lot. So anecdotally, once we'd changed the name, our inbound lead MQL rate improved phenomenally, because we were no longer weeding out all of these inquiries that were looking for yacht satellite positioning systems or anything to do with maps or anything like that. So we kind of, that was a big issue. It was a kind of generic, and it was a name that didn't really reflect the essence of our business. And the other thing we learned was over the 15 years of being in business, we had evolved significantly from being a kind of behind-the-scenes systems processor to actually being a partner and enabler. So we are able to orchestrate different parties within the ecosystem on behalf of our clients, being sponsors, network partners, you name it. So we're kind of consultative and partnership-based, as well as it being like a physical tech platform. And we felt that Global Processing Services did not reflect that partnership element as well. And that came through loud and clear with all of the research. We researched with interviews with customers, with wannabe customers and prospects. We spoke to industry experts. We did a lot of kind of industry research, etc., etc. But it just came through that actually GPS was the ultimate payments partner. And we were missing a trick. It was like money left on the table that we were so hung up on the fact that we were a tech platform.
That's great to hear. So you had a very positive impact on the company. I think strategically rebranding is a very important process. And as you said, your positioning is clearer now. So in terms of your name and your brand, the tone of voice and everything else. So it's good to see that impact. Interestingly, during our briefing call we had last week, I think, Jack, you mentioned what is brand? Brand is a promise delivered, which I really love that. Now, can you tell us maybe a little bit more about branding at Plum, but also your background in Monzo is fantastic, because you come from a very established brand in fintech.
Yeah, I mean, talking about GPS, I remember when I joined, we were still on GPS at Monzo. So when you said about that, I just had like fun memories of the time where Monzo was absolutely tiny and we were rushing around trying to make everything work with a lot of support from GPS. So I remember that very well. But brand as a promise delivered is a phrase that my boss at Plum uses, and I actually think it's a really great encompassing of what brand really is. I don't think brands are what you write down in your slide deck. However much you want to kind of everyone in your company to kind of rally behind the brand book, or however you define your positioning, ultimately it's what exists in customers' minds. So if someone's thinking one particular thing about your brand, that is to them what the brand is. I also think another way of that's interesting about thinking about brands is that if you were to remove all of the assets that your company has, your office space, through to everything else, I think it's the thing that is left. It's the thing that people think about when you remove all the kind of bits of your company. So yeah, I was fairly on early at Monzo. I did product marketing and then a brand at Monzo. And for us, and maybe we'll talk a bit more about this in more detail later on, but for us, we really focused on not only just speaking customers' language. I think we hear that a lot in marketing. We hear people say, speak your customer's language. I think that's true. But the way we really defined that was just being as simple as possible. Every sentence we wrote, we scrutinized and we made it simpler. It's amazing what you can achieve when you scrutinize yourself so much on those kinds of things. We were really clear on making sure that everything was understandable for non-native speakers, for example. Were we using idioms? Were we saying things that people who, perhaps haven't been to a certain part of the country would or wouldn't understand? And that's just, I guess one of the kind of many things that we applied to the brand there. But yeah, we're in a similar spot at Plum where we are kind of refreshing as well. But yeah, we can talk a little bit about it.
Yes, let's talk about that later on. But it's very interesting what you're saying, because the brand is a reflection not just of your customers, but other stakeholders, your employees. So it's not an easy task actually to have a consistent brand, and brand that is accessible as well to different customers, underserved customers, diverse customers. So it's and as marketers we are like brand guardians, so we need to always make sure that everything is consistent and aligned to the strategy of the company. And so James, it's not an easy task to design and to amplify your brand, and especially when you're working on how can the brand help demand generation for the business, developing the business, and we can touch upon that later on. But maybe if you can tell us more about branding at the organization and how you see branding developing.
I mean, brand's been important from day one for Pleo, and I can't claim to have been there on day one. I've been there 2.5 years. Pleo's about 8 years old, and Pleo's a founder-led business. Brand's been very important to our co-founders, so much so that they would say it was critical in getting Series A, Series B, Series C funding. The conversations I have with them do sort of centralize around brand. I do have to sometimes ensure we're having the right conversation, because there's brand and there's brand identity, and I think sometimes those things get conflated. So people talk about we have a great brand, but what they're talking about is the brand identity, the look and feel, the visual. And even recently, and you feel a bit bad educating people on your board, but you have to kind of bring them back to, I think you were saying as well, Jack, it's so much more than brand identity. It's around the user experience as well. In fact, probably maybe equally or more so. The conversation they've had with a seller or somebody in CX, how we treat problems, how we show up in the media. So it's much broader than just visual identity. However, our visual identity is pretty important to us as well. I think we have quite a good standout in the market, which has a lot of Me Too stuff.
Excellent. Now moving on to the second topic, which is like comparing fintechs to incumbents, so like banks. We're hosted by Barclays, so thank you Barclays for hosting us together. It's banks and fintechs. At the beginning, fintechs were born in 2008 during financial crisis. They were offering consumers different things from banks. They claimed they wanted to offer a better service to consumers and to help consumers and businesses. For example, 60% of SME lending is done by fintechs today. So, fintechs has done an amazing journey from 2008 to today. And there was competition at the beginning, the fintechs trying to, build a presence, the Revolut, the Monzo, the Starling. And now the sector has matured so much. You see that, Zopa Bank is being now profitable. Monzo has got investment from Google Venture Capital. Revolut announced today just fantastic results. Starling is profitable, so it's really kind of a solid sector that we always need to support the sector to grow even further. But what can we learn in terms of branding? So fintechs are competing. in the same space, to establish the brand and to have the brand, present. Are banks behind fintechs in terms of the branding? Are banks learning from fintechs? Are fintechs learning from banks? What's your view? Vanessa, let's start with you maybe. Or maybe Jack, because you have this experience from Monzo.
I think banks are way ahead of fintech still in terms of branding, for sure.
Right.
I think that's because they spend so much more money, frankly, and that's because they have so much more money. Fintechs have this very unique challenge where they have to really punch above their weight, especially in our category. Whenever I speak to our team at Plum, and certainly it was the same at Monzo, we talk about our competitive set a lot, and we talk about the people in our direct category. That shouldn't be the case. We should be talking about who our customers are choosing as competitive alternatives. So are they choosing, at Monzo we didn't really care if they were choosing Starling or Lloyds. At Plum we don't care if they're choosing Chip or Hargreaves Lansdown, for example. Both of these are kind of valid to look at. But I think, the more kind of incumbent bank brands have a lot of money, and they use longevity as a great marketing tool. So we all think that longevity is a great thing for banks to have. We think that because banks have spent years and years telling us that longevity is a good thing. Longevity hasn't been such a good thing. 2008 was a great example. We forget that NatWest is still owned by the taxpayer, and they're owned by the taxpayer because of what happened in 2008. Doing some great brand work though, and this is the thing: the brand work that you see from Lloyds, for example, that have complete consistency with the black horse running through a field, frustrates me a lot because it's such a great brand asset, but they use it to drive brand recognition and, more importantly, brand trust again and again and again. It is so important to kind of build these kind of brand assets, and you see Lloyds doing it, you see NatWest doing it, you see all of the kind of big banking brands do that. Fintech has got a long way to kind of catch up on that, and you've started to see that work certainly in the more kind of consumer fintechs. The work that Monzo is doing, they've just spent a lot of money in market, really kind of re-establishing and reiterating the hot coral colour. I think that's going to work tremendously well for them kind of going forward.
Great.
That's
Thank
a great
you.
word of mouth thing as well, isn't it? You see someone with the hot coral card, and then it starts a whole conversation about how easy it is to set up an account with Monzo, and then it's just kind of fueling itself.
Big time. And that was a complete accident, by the way. Everyone says to us, what an amazing stroke of genius. Complete accident. We saw this colour that we liked, and then we tried to develop it, and we were very lucky that became such a strong brand asset. But if anyone tries to tell you that is like masterstroke brand strategy, it wasn't. It was an accident. But we used it to kind of build brand recognition, and we really recognised that was a key brand asset for us back then.
And it puts you top of digital wallet as well. It's the first thing you see when you open up a digital wallet.
Yeah.
It is a stroke of genius.
I would challenge just one thing, which I think is more of a generational comment. So I have, not my generation, I have two daughters. They're both Gen Z. They don't care about longevity of a bank. They don't care about seeing a horse every time in an advert. They care about, can I get out the card and put a picture on it? That's true. They care about vaults and accessibility and all these kind of other things. And I was listening to a really good podcast the other day, 20VC, and they had their former head of growth of Revolut on there, and they're just quick. They ordered initially 10,000 metal cards because they thought they wouldn't. They were in a position where they had to print so many more. They operate in countries that nobody else operates in. So I think there's definitely a generation element to the way we think about branding in fintech versus banks.
And it's a great point because you were talking about Monzo, Revolut. Monzo, the new campaign is fantastic. Revolut is investing in out-of-home advertisement, so they're kind of catching up. And the banks have the advantage of having built trust with consumers. Some banks have 200 years. Some banks are 100 years old. So But my question is, it's just about how much money you spend, or as James is saying, it's appealing to new audiences, because we all have, I don't know, I have maybe 6 or 7 apps on my phone, different banks. I got Monzo, I got Revolut, I got a big bank, the NatWest, and the Barclays. And so the new generation actually is reaching quite quickly from one to the other. So yes, it is maybe how much money you spend, but it's also how powerful you are to reach the new audiences directly. I don't know if you have any views on that.
I think they just want frictionless, cheap, easy. They don't really care much about the brand, so long as it's easy to tap, to pay, transfer money to mates. They don't have to go somewhere and fill in a form or do anything. Then I think that will be the equity, and it doesn't matter if it's a bank that's been around for 250 years or 250 days. At the end of the day, it's about frictionless, ease of use.
Yes.
I'm inclined to agree with them.
Yes.
I also think that the days of traditional brand building are not over yet, but haven't got a lot of time. You know, you think about, again, this generation, you think about things like organic social. You know, fintechs are just so much better. They employ people that are better than this, and kind of reminds me a little bit. I was at Microsoft for just under 10 years, and we always tried to be cool, but we never came across as cool. So much so that the Xbox team, which was part of Microsoft, disassociated themselves with Microsoft because they didn't want to. And I kind of see that happening a little bit as well. You know, so I think, you know, arguably it's a little bit lazy brand building for me. In terms of the traditional media, it's I don't think it takes a genius marketeer to spend 100 million on traditional methods. I think, you know, and I know Monzo and Revolut probably spend a lot more than Pleo does for sure, but I just think they have more credibility in new channels to marketing.
And we can maybe discuss about sponsorship as well as one of the channels that we have as marketeers to promote our brand. And so let's move to the third topic, which is how do we measure success of a brand? And I think, James, you're well positioned to answer that question. So especially when your company is growing, and so you have more stakeholders involved, you have the board asking for the return on investment on your marketing. So how do you see the kind of the performance media landscape changing? How at Pleo you measure success for the brand? And anything that you maybe want to touch upon, push and pull. So how important is the push versus the pull?
It's really difficult. I think a couple of the other speakers spoke about it earlier as well in terms of this dilemma that we face and this trade-off. We're currently in a position at the moment where we're focusing more on growth, but we've just crossed 100 million ARR. So typically, when you reach that threshold, you're spending less on kind of growth and demand gen and more on kind of brand and category creation. However, it's this fine balance. The thing companies like is predictability, return on investment metrics. I think at the moment we can probably measure about 70% of what we do and 30% is unmeasured. I think that's going to switch completely. I think this is going to take a new skill from marketeers in terms of convincing boards and CEOs, CFOs to take a bit of a leap of faith with new things. Even when I joined Pleo, we were spending 80% of our budget on performance marketing. That's now 50%. It will continue to reduce. It's becoming harder. Attribution. I spent so much time in my career with attribution. Nobody has nailed it. I don't care what anybody says. Whatever tools you're using, it's really, really challenging and difficult. So there's a part of what we need to do is part of instinct. In terms of brand, we look at certain indicators like growth and organic traffic. We look at NPS, we look at reviews, Trustpilot, G2, Capterra, those kind of things. And those are the kind of indicators that we can look on a daily basis. But we've also kind of invested in tracking brand sentiment, brand consideration on a longer term basis. But what I find with marketeers is they'll do it for a year and then somebody changes personnel and then you stop it. And it's expensive as well, or can be expensive. So it's very challenging, but you've got to commit to it.
Excellent, thank you. And Vanessa, during the call, we talked about not just using, especially fintechs when they're measuring success, not using just the standard metrics. I think you mentioned NPS, Net Promoter Score as well.
That's right. We do that internally with our customers. So again, it's kind of frame it in the B2B lens, and that is useful. I think the challenge with that is encouraging fill-in and adoption from clients. But it is a very useful metric just in terms of how we are engaging with them. But obviously with B2B, it's a very different situation. If you've got a much larger audience in B2C. But I think generally fintechs are trying to use other metrics to fill in the blanks where the main metrics are not measurable.
Yes. And Jack, from a B2C perspective, how do you see measuring success for brands?
Very difficult, very difficult. Especially in kind of scaling up companies. The finance team is very keen for attribution to be spot on. And in truth, the only way that you can get kind of accurate attribution is by using low funnel performance channels. But you just run out of people to target very, very, very quickly. I guess what we're looking at Plum, and what I've obviously done before as well, the way I always say this to our team is you kind of have to get some quick wins in to start with and kind of demonstrate your ability to drive business success, and then over time you gain trust from the finance team, you get a bit more kind of leeway on budgets, and then you can kind of demonstrate a little bit more as well. It sounds very similar to kind of what you were saying in terms of changing the budgets around there. So,
really working on performance marketing to just get trust of your team, your finance team, the board, and then have a little bit more freedom to explore and experiment on branding
100%.
activities.
And trying to change as well how your cadences with finance. So, like an annual budget is something that I really love our teams to aspire for. In truth, in smaller companies, you do it in a smaller scale because money starts to run out and you're thinking, okay, let's do it 6 monthly or even monthly. But in truth, you can't drive good marketing outcomes without an annual budget. And so that's another thing that's kind of really quite practical to apply.
Excellent. And do you actually use artificial intelligence to help you measuring success of your brand? Yes?
Not success with a brand yet, but we're using AI a lot of what we're doing. But it's co-pilot rather than autopilot for us at the moment. But like every day there's a new AI tool that's claiming to do something. My take on budget, by the way, is not to have a budget at all.
Unlimited budget.
Give us all the money.
I heard some thought
Ask for forgiveness.
That's not zero budget. That's just we have a new CFO, and I said to him that that's the goal. That we can demonstrate the return that we're having on this business to such a point that we can spend what we want. He said he'd love that, but I can't see it happening. It's just an
I think we have 5 minutes, so I would like to thank my panelists. Fantastic, but if you have any questions now, it's your time to ask.
Amazing. Yeah, let's go with some questions.
Hey, you mentioned speaking the language of the customer, but also simplifying it, and still staying relevant, not using idioms for non-native speakers. So how do you ensure the inclusivity and while also staying relevant? For example, I could be the target audience of all these 3 companies. English is my third language. I don't understand most idioms in English still. So how do you stay inclusive in your branding, your messaging, so that?
Great question. In terms of practically applying it, I very strongly believe that you should have incredibly strong writing training, and that should be done by everyone in the company. The reason you should do it for everyone in the company is then everyone speaks the same language, and it's almost not a conversation about how you write. I doubling down on the simplicity point though, I think you really do have to scrutinize your language again and again and again until you are at the genesis of what you want to say. And I think you'll find just by applying that, you generally do reach that target, but I don't know if
the thing is, so a good example for me would be Apple, right? So they sell an iPhone to, I can't even think how many personas they're selling that to, but they focus on 1 or 2 personas, and that's what they that's the kind of voice that they use. And I think that's always going to be something in the back of my mind in terms of just, rather than trying to please such a broad church, just pick 1 or 2 personas and speak in an authentic voice with consistency. So, but Apple's a great example. They do it really well.
And if I can add about accessibility, I mean it's common sense, but also how accessible is your website? Can people read things on the website? Because there's a quite a good number of people with disability in the UK. So I think accessibility also means, are we helping other consumers that are not as lucky as others? So it's kind of, working with Project Nemo, for example, that actually was launched here, and Joanne, previous CEO of GPS, by the way. So I think that's a great initiative as well. So it's always looking at that accessibility.
And that's a good point. When we did the patterns for the Thredd branding, it's the Thredd indigo with a variety of different bright colours, but we actually ran that through an accessibility engine to make sure that the colours weren't off the spectrum to the point where either they couldn't be seen or they were too disruptive. Yeah, good point.
There was another question there. Yes?
I have 2 questions, but I'm going to be greedy. I'll find out later. I have a question, it's probably more aimed at Vanessa, but looking at Thredd's rebrand, for example, to what extent do you think like the B2B, especially fintech space, is kind of borrowing from B2C space, and like to what extent do you think will be successful with that? For example, looking at Monzo and other.
Yeah, big time, and I think that is. It's a bit of an adage at the moment, isn't it, that you're selling to human beings rather than there being a B2B, B2C split. So that was very much part of our charge, if you like. We just had a look with the competitive set of all of the branding of our immediate competitors. And, with respect, it was really a sea of sameness. Things have moved on even since we started that process, but there was a lot of corporate navy blue and very similar layouts, and it was all kind of magazine style. So we really wanted to try and take the B2C zing and try and bring that into the space. But it's a race that's happening very quickly. I think others are following very, very quickly.
Is there any more questions?
Amazing. Any other questions?
Thank you. You mentioned brand and you also mentioned the founders, James. So I have a question. How do you balance, especially when the company scales, how do you balance the company brand with the brands of your founders and potentially thought leaders? And to what extent do they inform each other?
To me, they're one and the same. So we have two co-founders at Pleo. One of them's our CEO now, and one is Danish, and very influenced by kind of Nordic culture. The other co-founder is a super passionate Italian who sat me down, I think a couple of months in, because he'd seen my background in Microsoft and some other bigger companies, even Dropbox to some extent, and he basically said, excuse my language, don't fuck up our brand. Smiley face. But he was so passionate about the brand, so passionate about kind of its uniqueness and distinctness. So that's kind of our leading light in terms of how we think about content and thought leadership. I mean, Pleo translated means unexpected, or more than expected. So that's kind of the ethos that we try and carry through everything from photography to language to content that we're creating as well, or how we show up at an event, just these little details. So, but it's a good thing having an authentic, founder-led brand, I think. It's challenging too. Yeah. I mean, last year so Pleo was built originally for end users, and then we kind of shifted. We're focusing much more on finance professionals and CFOs. So our vision and mission needed to be updated after 7 years. So obviously I take on the work around vision and mission. It was probably one of the hardest things I've done in my career, and I've been around a while, trying to extract from our co-founders what the company was, what the purpose, what the essence. And it was just a long process where every single word was scrutinized, and we kind of landed on something which is good, but it's great, but it's also time consuming. So.
Amazing. Any further questions? Yes, got one in the back. Sorry, I can't walk that fast.
Hi there, I work at a B2B business, and I'm about to go down this process with my founder. He hates brand because he's got colouring and stuff. So I'm not calling it a rebrand or a brand update, I'm calling it a reposition. I just wanted to pick your brains really. I've got one piece of advice for someone like myself, and I'm sure there are others in the room who are about to do the same or in the process of it. How would you go about that?
So I've just completed this process with our founder. And yes, it's a massive challenge, but super rewarding as well, because the moment where your founder kind of like looks at the room and goes, that's it, it's just like nothing else. So stick with it is like a piece of advice I think I would give. I think there's no such thing as over-communicating. If you think there is something that your founder knows about brand, they probably don't. So I would over-communicate that and take them on the journey with you. So every single step that you do, we did it weekly because we were making a lot of progress quickly. We were under some kind of quite tight time pressure to deliver this refresh, and we call it a refresh, by the way, not a repositioning. So every single week, and we would just go into all the detail. It feels like a lot, but it's really, really, really worth it because just forcing yourself to have that cadence where you're with them every week. The other thing I would say is that if there is someone that protects your founder's time, become best friends with them and extort that so you can make the most of all the time, because you will need to spend this time now so you don't have to do it in the future.
Vanessa, anything from you?
I would say, again, it's just back to get as much data and information as you possibly can, because that totally annihilates all of the subjectivity. If you've got a founder that loves the colour purple and hates the word dog and all these random things, if you've got the data, sorry, that was actually a mistake. I know people are allergic to dogs. I didn't know that. The data, then you can tell a story, and you can. And I totally agree with what you're saying about the cadence of meetings. And also, we had a kind of. This is where we're up to, but we've got all of these other steps to get through over the coming months, so that they could see where they were on the roadmap. And could understand that it wasn't the end of the story once we'd actually done the brand architecture. There were still all of the other steps to go through. So it's just very transparent.
I agree with you, and also I would say find allies. So if your CEO founder doesn't like brand, there are other people in the company that like branding. So surround yourself with allies. If you have if you're lucky to have an agency working with you, just rely on them. And also try to focus on the why is important. It's not just like a refresher, but why is it important? So the data is very important. So back up all your opinions with facts and data on the positioning. So is the new brand going to position differently, and how, and why is it important? And then time frame. So if you have a 6-month project, then make sure that you stick to it and you deliver it like on a weekly basis, because otherwise you can lose track.
Are you renaming as well as repositioning?
No, that's the one thing that's off the table.
Okay.
I would just add, there's a lot of what, I would just add there's a big thing around the how, so just be confident, like you're the expert. I think what tends to work, and I find founders want to be led sometimes and want confidence. If you're subservient, if you kind of second guessing or trying to please, it's never going to work. So just, be bold and confident because you're the expert.
One more thing. I don't know if this works for me, but when I found out that my founder hated brand, I just started calling it long-term growth instead. And honestly, it changed. It changed everything. I was like, we just need to invest in long-term growth with great creative, and that is. There you go. And we now call it brand because we've been on that journey together. But like long-term growth, that might help.
Great.
Good luck.
Amazing. I don't know.
Pull back. Let us know how you get on.